In June last year, Canada's population hit a record 40 million. This was the highest annual population growth in Canada since 1957. A few months later, Canada's population increased by another 1 million. For a country that's known to be rather friendly, to the extent where Canadians are a stereotype in kindness,
"We're gonna mop the floor with you. We're gonna put the boots to you." Sorry.
It's all right.
these numbers suddenly revealed a rather big issue, one that is almost taboo to talk about. And if it's not taboo, it's either too politically incorrect or controversial. But I think it's time to have an honest conversation about mass immigration to Canada. Before we get into immigration, let me paint you a picture of what things are like in Canada right now. To start off, Canada currently might have the worst housing crisis in the developed world. To say that as an Australian, honestly, is astounding to me. Housing prices have more than doubled in the past decade, but rent's following a similar trend. As an example, in Toronto, the average resident spends 120% of their income on rent. In Vancouver, you need to earn at least $250,000 to qualify for a mortgage. And finally, Canada has the highest household debt amongst the G7 countries.
The economy is in shambles right now. Taking close look at the marketplace right now. Dow Jones.
But that's not all. Canadians in general pay more than most people globally for essentials like groceries, banking fees, phone plans, and air travel. Fuel is more expensive in Canada than the USA. And healthcare? The healthcare system Canada was known for. It is now more expensive than Europe, and only 37% of Canadians believe they'll receive proper medical care in a sudden emergency. That's compared to 70% of Americans. Canada also ranks poorly in metrics like waiting times and the number of hospital beds compared to Europe. And overall, the system is ranked amongst the worst in the OECD countries. So, is it that surprising that 2/3 of Canadians believe the country is deeply broken? Onto immigration. Now, before I begin, let me address something to preempt any accusations of being a white supremacist or other buzzwords that might be thrown my way. I am a first-generation immigrant to Australia myself, brown as you can guess, and as an overall rule, I think sustainable migration of people willing to assimilate but needed skills is a great and somewhat inevitable thing for countries where things are going well. Keyword being sustainable. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. Canadians, according to polling, have had a mostly positive attitude towards immigration over the past few decades. In fact, it was ranked the most accepting country for immigrants in 2019. However, everything changed last year, with immigration numbers breaking record after record.
Last Friday, our country hit a new milestone, officially surpassing 40 million in population.
Canadians started seeing demographic changes in real time. For the first time in decades, Canadians are now significantly more likely to say there was way too much immigration to the country. And not just that, for the first time, a growing number of Canadians are questioning how many immigrants were arriving rather than who they were and where they were coming from. However, in this particular case, and for the purposes of this video, I'd like to address the taboo elephant in the room, and that's by going straight to the source of mass immigration into Canada, India. I guess at this point, some viewers are probably already booing and hurling fruits at me, but you've got to call a spade without being unfairly accused of isms that frankly derail from a conversation that I feel many Canadians appear to want to have. The current mass migration issue into Canada is primarily due to immigration from India, and that too from a specific state in India called Punjab. According to data, Indian migrants outnumber all other migrants from other countries combined. In fact, even disregarding international students and temporary workers, the top 3 sources for permanent residency in Canada in the past 3 years have been overwhelmingly from India. It's not even close. The number of immigrants to Canada from India has tripled since 2020, with that number about to reach 2 million this year. That is insane. To put that into perspective, that's a bigger number than the total populations of Canada's largest cities, apart from Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. So you immediately need to ask this question. Has Canada built new cities or new houses or added extra infrastructure and social services to accommodate these new migrants? The answer is a rather easy and obvious no. But we need to look into how mass immigration from India is currently allowed to happen in Canada. The vast majority of the intake are either international students or temporary workers. Many of these international students enroll at diploma mills that are designed as a backdoor pathway into Canada, where they immediately start working. As an example, in Brampton, their mayor told reporters that the city was home to between 70 to 80 such institutions. One thing many commentators have noted on this issue was, Canada is not exactly attracting the right type of immigrants from India either. All the best ones head to the USA. Consider evidence in the fact that they are the highest earning migrant group in the USA, where migration is actually quite difficult. On top of this, for a migrant group, they seem to make up a rather large cohort of CEOs at top American companies as well. This, as many have observed, means Canada gets a lot of significantly lower skilled, less experienced economic migrants who don't exactly have assimilation in mind. Assimilation becomes especially hard when your entire path to naturalization occurs without having to interact with anybody outside your own community, especially if the sheer number of immigration accommodates creating such an environment. This also creates an environment ripe for exploitation. Going back to housing, this has created a rather precarious situation in Canada. It's now created a market in Canada for seedy landlords from the same migrant groups who buy up housing in places like Brampton to rent out to 10 or 20 international students from India. In a January council meeting, Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown said the city has up to 100,000 people living in substandard houses, an estimated 30,000 illegal rental units, including complaints about dozens of students crammed in one basement.
I'm thinking if I get into bed and I get real low and flat, and maybe you're underneath me or on top of me, you know, they won't see us.
Well, how does that work?
These landlords prey on these often desperate students, installing bunk beds and housing for very young Indian students in what look like slums. And they don't hide this either. Shameless promotions are rather common and, well, kind of funny too. Have you seen ads for one of these houses? If not, let me show you a few. Here's one where you can see 4 mattresses on the floor, and the landlord is looking for a 4th person who should obviously be Indian. Here's another with 4 beds this time, not just mattresses on the floor. Luxurious, a nice $600 a month for the privilege. Here's another with 3 beds in one room, but barely any space in between them. You might have to walk over other people's beds to get to the other side of the room. Oh, and obviously, you need to be Indian for that privilege as well. Well, unfortunately with this one, we're back to sleeping on mattresses on the floor. Here's another upgraded one with a few bunk beds, and you can be the 4th female to live here. Quite a few of these are also rather discriminatory in relation to what ethnicity you've got to be able to rent from them. Check this out. Got to be Gujarati, and what is a pure vegetarian? Is that just vegan? Same thing here. Got to be Gujarati and vegetarian to share with 2 other people. Once again, luxurious. Here it gets even better. Clearly aimed at Indian students, you've got to be vegetarian, and also no eggs, and no party either. This landlord tries to one up the other. No smoking, drinking, meat, eggs. Oh, and no other kind of meat.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
And there are definitely more of these bizarre listings, clearly aimed at exploiting Indian students. Check this out. Not only do you need to be Indian and female, but you need to be at the rental overnight as a condition. So, your rental contract requires you to be at home. Also, you need to be single. Looks like this landlord wants to control your sex life. And here's a rather interesting ad. Luckily, it is furnished and pet friendly. I think any reasonable person will look at these and immediately tell there is a form of exploitation going on. Well, in Brampton, the city decided to bring in new measures by bringing in a rental licensing pilot. The aim was to curb illegal lodging. Naturally, hordes of landlords, primarily Indian, came out to protest. This article I was reading interviewed a man who was renting his house to 10 people. Yes, 10. And he somehow is the victim. It's appalling that Indian landlords in Canada are so hellbent on not just adding to a terrible housing crisis, but exploiting people new to the country, well, from their own communities. The good news is though, you can, on the other hand, add towards something better. And that is towards my subscriber goal of 5,000 by the end of the year. So, if you're enjoying this video so far, please help me get there by hitting that subscribe button. I really appreciate any and all support towards a growing small channel like mine. Let's move it towards the students and the temporary workers from India. Now, we know the vast majority work in retail or the service sector. Clearly, diploma mills, universities and businesses in need of workers on low pay are benefiting a lot here. But the issue is, this also takes away job opportunities from young people who traditionally have had their first jobs within the service sector, as has been for many years. Is it a stereotype that Tim Hortons is now almost entirely staffed by Indian students or temporary workers? And therein lies the problem. Post the pandemic, Canada isn't exactly filling in-demand positions by bringing in students to study for those positions. Studies demonstrate that neither federal nor provincial governments, nor Canadian colleges and universities themselves focused international student recruitment squarely on filling the country's most pressing labour needs. Have a look at this graph showing data from 2018 to 2023. The vast majority of students were enrolling in business, marketing, computing, and the arts field. The business field had more enrollments than all the science fields combined. Medicine sat at the bottom, right next to theology. The number of study permits granted for programs in business management, marketing, and related support services increased fivefold between 2018 and 2023. No other field of study saw anywhere near that rapid of an increase. It's a double-edged sword because these students aren't particularly valuable in the job market and therefore not really getting work within their field. Rupa Banerjee, an associate professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, is quoted as saying, "Instead of really trying to bring in the best and the brightest to fill the labour market gaps that need to be filled, what we're doing is bringing in low-skill, low-wage, expendable and exploitable temporary foreign workers in the form of students." Educational institutions benefit immensely due to this. Business programs are quite cheap to run compared to technical degrees, and also makes up for underfunding issues from the government. On top of that, consultants in India also benefit by selling this idea to students that these degrees lead to an easy career in Canada. And consider all the additional fees English testing places like IELTS and the government would make from these students. It seems everybody but the students and average Canadians benefit. So what do these students do? According to 2023 data, one job saw the highest growth in Canada: ride sharing and taxi services. They saw an almost 50% increase from 2022. Delivery drivers also saw an almost 20% increase from the prior year. That's a total of almost 500,000 drivers, of which almost 60% were immigrants. And we go back to the question I asked earlier in the video: has Canada built new cities or new houses or added extra infrastructure and social services to accommodate these new migrants? And yet they're adding hundreds of thousands of people to be milked for all their worth by educational institutions and big business. I don't think Canada needs another 500,000 Uber drivers, but doctors, tradesmen and scientists? Absolutely, based on all the data that's currently available. It is also important to ask whether these are, in fact, genuine students. I believe most genuine students enroll at great universities and their priority would be to study. Because in many developed countries that exploit education, prospective students are required to prove that they can finance themselves and have limited working rights. However, in Canada, it appears many of these new students' primary goal is to immediately start working and eventually gain PR. According to college unions, many of these students aren't even ready for tertiary education. Many apparently lack basic arithmetic and computer skills, including knowing how to turn on a computer or operate within a network. The minimum English requirements in Canada is also relatively low. What really caught my eye recently was a bunch of students from India protesting against missing out on PR. With this particular one in Prince Edward Island on Canada's Atlantic coast, students on postgrad visas are protesting out of frustration that their visas are expiring with no chance of permanent residency. They argue against changes made by Prince Edward Island that essentially pause nominations issued to sales and food service employees alongside a reduction in the volume of provincial selection for PR. The island made the announcements, citing housing shortages and realignment with labour market priorities. And that's a fair point. Even on postgrad visas, students, in my opinion, especially in low-skilled industries, should not expect an entitlement to permanent residency. In-demand sectors and macroeconomic conditions change all the time, and when that does happen, surely it's common sense to expect countries to prioritise their own first, no? Well, the ringleader of these protests, Rupinderpal Singh, apologies if I mispronounced that, had other ideas. For starters, he's rather adamant in not working within an in-demand field, and instead prioritises low-skilled jobs and big business like Tim Hortons.
Why should they be changing? What will happen to our employer? They want us to change jobs and go to those sectors. What will happen to our employers? What will happen to the person who owns Tim Hortons? Like if we have 20 people joining us from Tim Hortons, if they're changing their field, what will happen to Tim Hortons owner? Who will work there? All jobs are jobs.
And even more curiously, in the same hearing, he appears to admit he actually owns property and land in Canada. He even complains about not having a visa while owning property.
My brother, he has property to his name. I co-signed it, right? I have my name in the property in Canada. I own some land. I paid my share in it. And when I don't even have the visa, how I can come to my own place?
Well, for starters, How are temporary postgrad students even allowed to purchase homes? Surely that's not mortgaged, because I can't think of banks giving out 30-year mortgages to a person with just 3 years on their visa. But it's hard to feel sorry for the guy. He's making demands of a foreign government that, curiously, won't be allowed in India by a foreign national, and also asking people to report videos critical of the protests. I also hated the entitlement I saw from this video from the channel True North, where he asked the interviewer, a Canadian, if he was from here.
I've got a question since you brought up the video. Do you think that it's right to try to get people to try to censor Canadians' opinions on your protest?
Then, brother, you should know what's protest about. You shouldn't post without
What did I say about the protest that was not accurate?
You said that you should deport them. Who are you to make that decision?
Well, if you are if there's no space in Prince Edward Island for more service workers.
Who are you to decide that, brother? Who are you to decide? How would you know? Are you from here? I know you're from.
Are you from here?
I am here. I'm here since 1.5 years. Are you here since 1.5 years?
No, but I am a Canadian, so that...
There are a number of cultural issues, or rather, misunderstandings that have occurred due to these students as well. The most famous incidents recently being Indian students taking food from food banks meant for the needy.
Let me show you what I got this week. You can take as much as you want. Sare basic fruits and vegetables, bread, sauces, pastas and canned vegetables, which is subject to availability.
It got so bad that many food banks in Canada are now refusing international students altogether. Many have also noted the rise in extremist elements due to separatist movements like the Khalistan movement now gaining significant foothold due to the sheer number of immigration from India. The issue is, it really doesn't appear Canadians have too much power in reducing migration to sustainable levels. Many seem rather lost when it comes to deciding who to vote for, because all major political parties generally do not appear to favour mass reduction in these numbers. And that leads me to the question of, what is the end goal here? What is that magic number Canada is trying to get to? Well, luckily, there is in fact a very powerful lobbying group called the Century Initiative that gives us that answer. 100 million people by 2100. That's right, add almost 60 million more people, mostly through immigration, is their stated goal. We really don't need to dig very deep to figure out the fact that large multinational corporations are in charge of this group, as obviously they stand to gain most from mass immigration and ever-increasing prices of goods and services. The co-founder and board member of the group, Mark Wiseman, is a World Economic Forum member and one of BlackRock's most senior executives. The other co-founder, Dominic Barton, was the head of McKinsey & Company, who have had a history of its employees working for this lobbying group. Whistleblowers have highlighted McKinsey's very significant influence over Canadian immigration policy. Pivoting back to BlackRock, we know they're purchasing a ton of single-family homes, estimated at over $35 billion in value. Of course, a growing population and increasing housing demand benefits them immensely. Dominic Barton is married to Geraldine Buckingham, who works as BlackRock's head of the Asia-Pacific region. I hope that helps paint a better picture of why Canadian immigration policies are the way they currently are. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure it would change either. Canada's issues are being driven by policies that favour the wealthy and leave the average Canadian struggling to keep up. I believe it's crucial for Canadians to start having an honest conversation about immigration. It's not racist to do so. Sustainable immigration should be the goal, and it should benefit everyone, not just a select few. Platforms like the subreddit Canada Housing 2 are essential for enabling these discussions, especially when others have been silenced for merely mentioning the issue. I highly recommend you check it out. So, keep talking about it, organise and grow a movement that benefits struggling Canadians. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Thanks for watching, thanks for your ongoing support, and I'll see you in the next one.